I rise today to cast my vote in support of the resolution we will shortly be voting on, which sends an important message that this body, directly representing the American people, wishes to end direct U.S. military support for the Saudi-led coalition's campaign in Yemen. I'm disappointed, but not surprised, that the President issued a veto, choosing to stand by a campaign of devastating consequences for the people of Yemen. Every time we have a vote on this resolution, and every day, the numbers get worse. But let us be clear. These numbers are people. 3 million human beings have been forced to flee. More than 15 million are on the brink of starvation. And more than 1 million individuals, children, mothers, fathers, are suffering from the largest cholera epidemic in the world. Even the coalition countries themselves insist there is no military solution to this man-made conflict. As Houthis, backed with destabilizing and increasing support from Iran, continue to launch attacks into civilian population centers, Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates continue their campaign, which has targeted hospitals and threatened humanitarian access. The fragile UN-brokered political process that emerged from Stockholm is almost at a breaking point. And to be sure, the Houthis slow-walking the implementation of this plan presents a serious challenge. But U.S. focus should now be on supporting a meaningful, inclusive, and comprehensive process, even if it is one step at a time. A process that must start by ensuring the vital humanitarian relief reaches those who need it most desperately. As some of my colleagues and the President have repeated, we do indeed have important security and military partnerships with the countries comprising the coalition. But these partnerships are not a blank check for weapons and direct support for a campaign that is decidedly working against U.S. interests in the region. In addition to the truly horrific attacks on civilians, we have credible, alarming reports that our partners are transferring U.S. weapons to non-state actors who have worked directly against the United States. Moreover, the length and brutality of this campaign has allowed Iran to exploit a vacuum and increase its influence and presence in the Gulf. Mr. President, this resolution sends an important message, but much work remains to be done. I have a bipartisan bill that would authorize serious policy regarding U.S. weapons sales, that would hold accountable those blocking humanitarian aid, and help set the stage for supporting a meaningful political process. So I've said before, we should consider this resolution just as one step, but one that must be taken, one that the Congress has shown it supports. So while the President has made his decision clear, the Congress must continue to assert our independence and continue to act where he will not. Finally, let me also repeat what I said this morning at the Senate Foreign Relations Committee's business meeting. The executive has a responsibility to share with us critical information that is directly relevant to the work of the committee. Last month, I discovered intelligence directly related to a topic that the administration had regularly briefed the committee about, but completely omitted. Without going into the details, I called the administration to provide committee members with more information. I believe the full Senate should have this information, which is relevant to votes we have taken. And I'll be asking the majority and minority leaders to convene an all-senators briefing on this topic. I think they should know before they cast votes. With that, Mr. President, I yield the floor. Observe the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
The Senator for Idaho.
Are we in quorum call?
We are.
I'd ask quorum call be vitiated, please.
Without objection.
Mr. President, today we again consider Senate Joint Resolution number 7, which is a joint resolution that directs, and I quote from the resolution, removal of U.S. armed forces from hostilities in Yemen. This is the second time, of course, that we have considered this. We passed it, the House passed it, and the President has vetoed it, and it is now in front of us for under our constitutional responsibilities to consider whether or not the resolution becomes law, notwithstanding the President's signature. I'm going to urge a no vote on this, that it does not become law. and we sustain the veto that the President has made. As I've stated before, the premise of this resolution is fundamentally flawed, and I believe a mischaracterization of the actual facts on the ground today in Yemen. So I want to start, basically, by once again making it absolutely clear what is, and more importantly, what is not happening with respect to U.S. engagement in Yemen. What isn't happening is the injection of U.S. troops into active hostilities in the Yemen civil war. To put it simply, our troops are not co-belligerents in this conflict. What we are doing, however, is providing limited, non-combat support to the Saudi-led coalition, including intelligence sharing and practices that have been developed to minimize civilian casualties. I'm sure a goal that everybody in this body supports. This support is very narrow in focus. It is advisory in nature and helps defend the territorial integrity of Saudi Arabia and the UAE, which both face a very real threat from the Iranian-backed Houthis and from Iran itself. Our limited support is intended to prevent the conflict in Yemen from escalating. Iran's support for the Houthis, notably the transfer of missiles and other weaponry, threatens to undermine our partners' territorial integrity, imperils key shipping routes, and puts U.S. interests at risks, including thousands of U.S. personnel and citizens currently within range of the Iranian-made missile systems under Houthi control. And this, of course, includes the airport in Saudi Arabia, which many members of this body have used from time to time when you go to hotels in Saudi Arabia. Many of us have been, for a long time, proponents of resolving the war in Yemen, and it could be resolved if Iran regime will simply turn their back and walk away. Unfortunately, that is not likely. And when I say many of us have been longtime proponents, I would certainly include the presiding officer in that and commend him for his long and hard work in that regard. He has been dedicated to this for a long time and has been a leader on this, for which he is to be commended. Likely, many of us here today, I'm dissatisfied with the state of the U.S.-Saudi relationship. Indeed, while Saudi Arabia has long been a bulwark of our Middle East policy, there is a growing gap in U.S.-Saudi relations. Frankly, aspects of the Saudi Arabia's behavior are cause for serious, serious concern. We are taking a comprehensive look at our relationship with Saudi Arabia on the Foreign Relations Committee, and it is common knowledge that there are a number of pieces of legislation floating around here, some of which have been introduced and that are circulating, that address this issue. We are attempting to craft legislation that can garner support in the committee, address concerns on both sides of the aisle, and actually become law. I look forward to examining our interests in a measured and responsible way that will put the relationship on the right trajectory. This is not an easy needle to thread. All of us have concerns. All of us have specific issues in that regard. And what is important is that we don't just poke at this, but that we actually develop legislation that is bipartisan and that can be signed by the president and will become law. The debate today, however, is predicated on the notion that this resolution will punish the Saudis and stop the devastating humanitarian crisis in Yemen. It will do neither of those. In fact, the DoD has assessed that this legislation will have no impact on the limited support we are currently providing today. That said, there can be no arguing that after years of conflict, Yemen is now in the grip of the world's worst humanitarian crisis. And that is in spite of the fact that many members of this body, including the presiding officer, have gone way past limits to attempt to try to do things that would help that humanitarian crisis. Just the simple delivery of humanitarian matters, such as food, in the country have been frustrated by things that are logistically should be very easy but haven't been. And I know the presiding officer has been very active in that regard and been successful in that regard, for which he should be commended. An estimated 24 million, 80% of the Yemeni population are in need of assistance, and 15.9 million people, more than half of the country's population, remain severely food insecure. A solution to this conflict must be found, and make no mistake, many, indeed most of us, are committed to doing everything in our power to restore peace in a country that's been ravaged by years of proxy war and fractious infighting. I believe it is axiomatic that lasting peace can only be achieved through a political settlement brokered by the UN. The UN-led peace talks are our best bet for achieving peace in Yemen, and they appear to be at a critical juncture right now as we sit here today. As this body considers ways to drive effective U.S. policy that helps end the war and relieves humanitarian suffering in Yemen, I would urge all parties to abide by the agreement reached last December in Stockholm and find a political solution to the conflict. We should remain committed to do everything in our power to advance this cause. Thank you, Mr. President, and I ask for the yeas and nays.
Thursday, Attorney General William Barr declined to testify before the House Judiciary Committee